Justice Madan Lokur and friends, a very good evening to you all. Welcome to this annual event of Media Foundation. I am Harish Khare and I am currently the chairperson of Media Foundation. This evening, we shall be honoring the joint winners of 2019 Chameli Devi Jain Award for an outstanding woman journalist, as well as having the privilege of listening to the 2020 V.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture to be delivered by distinguished jurist Justice Madan Lokur, a retired judge of the Supreme Court. Our annual event normally takes place in India International Center, but as we know, circumstances have conspired that things should be different, and so we are constrained to hold this event digitally. Permit me to say a few words about the Media Foundation. The Media Foundation was conceived and set up by V.G. Verghese and like-minded editors and journalists in 1979. Verghese Sahab and eminent editors like Prabhat Joshi, N.S. Jagannathan, Ajit Bhattacharya, Kuldeep Nair were deeply affected by the experience of internal democracy from June 1975 to January 1977, when the Indian media, like many other institutions, came under assault from a determined and unforgiving administration. They were disturbed as to how easy it was for the government of the day to deny the media its autonomy, its robustness, and its professional space. Just as they were equally perturbed by the all too easy willingness of the media to fall in line. The idea before setting up Media Foundation was then to restate some basic fundamental truths and values of a free media. It brought together not just editors and journalists, but also professionals from different arenas of artistic creativity with the objective of defending and expanding freedom of speech and expression. Among its major activities, the Media Foundation takes pride in awarding every year the Chameli Devi Jain Award to a woman journalist for outstanding performance. The Chameli Devi Award, it ought to be noted, has been instituted in the name of Chameli Devi Jain, herself a pioneering activist and freedom fighter. The award is decided by a selection committee of eminent professional journalists and academicians. This year, we were privileged to have journalists like Srinivas Jain, managing editor of NDTV, Mr. Manoj Mitta, an editor who writes on legal human rights and public policy issues, and Professor Zoe Hassan, Professor Emerita of the Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. On behalf of Media Foundation, I wish to acknowledge our gratitude to the distinguished three-member jury for undertaking this task. Besides the Chameli Devi Award this evening, we will also listen to the V.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture. This lecture series was instituted in memories of Verghese Sahab, who passed away in 2014. Over the last 5 years, we have Mr. Gopal Gandhi, Jaira Ramesh, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, and former Vice President Honorable Hamid Ansari deliver the Verghese Memorial Lecture. The Media Foundation remains grateful to the Verghese family members for their continued involvement and encouragement, and to the Raja Foundation for its financial generosity that has made this evening possible. To start this evening's proceedings, I now request Mr. Manoj Mitta to read out the jurors' report for this year's Chameli Devi Award. This will be followed by reading of citations by the Pune-based Latika Patgaonkar, a senior member of the Media Foundation, and the awardees' acceptance speeches will follow. Thank you very much. Mr. Mitta.
The jury is happy to declare Rohini Mohan and Arfa Khanum Sherwani as joint winners of the 2019 Chameli Devi Jain Award. This rare departure from the practice of selecting a solitary winner is a reflection of the high quality of entries received for the journalistic work done in the rather turbulent year of 2019. In another rare gesture, the jury makes honorable mention of a third journalist, Rukmini S. For its sheer ingenuity and tenacity, Rohini Mohan's reportage on the NRC exercise in Assam sets a new benchmark for investigative journalism. In the tradition of the Fourth Estate, Rohini's meticulous research on the ground, her humane engagement with the affected people, and her analysis of the arbitrary conduct of the institutions involved have yielded findings that have proved to be extremely insightful and far-reaching. Arfa Khanum Sherwani excelled in reporting from conflict situations in Kashmir and Uttar Pradesh. Through her online videos in Hindi, including field reports and studio discussions, Arfa displayed exceptional courage and empathy in giving voice to people on the margins and holding authorities to account. Her work is marked by a deep and nuanced understanding of the issues that dominated the year. Rukmini Srinivasan deserves special recognition for pushing the boundaries of data journalism in India, for the imaginative manner in which she responded to a wide range of events by mining data and making little-known connections. Rukmini's stories were eye-openers, often counterintuitive as well. She has used data not just as cold numbers, but to shine a light on social injustices. These three journalists were picked from a total of 42 entries for what has been, right since its inception in 1982, the foremost award for women journalists. While most of the entries were from those practicing journalism in English, there were a few from their counterparts in Hindi, Malayalam, Odia, and Telugu. The nominees range from the head of a news portal to a noted TV news anchor, from those beginning to make a mark to those who have already received several awards. The nominees were from across the country, as evident from the three selected at the end of the challenging process of evaluation. Rohini is from Bengaluru, Arfa from Delhi, and Rukmini from Chennai. The jury records its deep appreciation to all the nominees for their remarkable achievement in doing journalism of a high order at a time when the credibility and freedom of the media have been increasingly under attack. They are a cause for hope and celebration. Latika Patgaonkar in Pune will now read the citations. Thank you.
Chameli Devi Jain Award for an Outstanding Woman Journalist 2019. Arfa Khanum Sherwani. Arfa Khanum Sherwani, the joint winner of the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Women Journalists 2019, has spent nearly 2 decades in broadcasting and is currently senior editor at the news portal The Wire. She has covered various elections, reported from conflict zones from Kabul to Iraq, always taking care to introduce her audiences to the politics of despair and the politics of backlash that have created those conflicts. In this connection, her insightful investigative reports about the rise of private militias and growing sectarian and caste clashes in the town of Gorakhpur and the brutal suppression of the revolt of beleaguered Dalits and tribals in Sonbhadra one of the most backward districts of Uttar Pradesh, are remarkable. In 2019, Arfa was one of the first journalists to visit the Kashmir Valley after the revocation of Article 370. She reported frequently from inside the valley at considerable risk to herself since the area was in a state of total lockdown. In all her body of work, Arfa comes across as a sensible, good listener and a truthful reporter of what she has witnessed. She can dive into the minds of the deprived, marginalized and often brutalized groups to reveal the heart of real India, where a struggle for equality, independence and autonomy goes on ceaselessly. She also documents the failures of the democratic state, detailing who have bent democratic institutions and how, marginalizing the already weaker sections of our society. Arfa's work presents to us an honest balance sheet of where we stand as a democracy today, and also how, since democratic aberrations are always man-made, they can be corrected while there is still time. For her grit and honesty, she richly deserves the award named after Chameli Devi Jain, a gutsy freedom fighter whose spirited support for Gandhian values of truth and non-violence in the face of police brutality and incarceration remain a beacon for us all. The Media Foundation is honoured to salute Arfa Khanum Sherwani with the Chameli Devi Jain Award for 2019.
Today is a day of great happiness for me. I'm humbled. Thank you for this tremendous honor. This award comes at a time when the government is strengthening its control over information. Instead of upholding transparency during the pandemic-induced crisis, it is muzzling reporters, suppressing free speech, and criminalizing dissent. False cases, frivolous FIRs, police violence, and the use of investigative agencies. These are some of the methods being used to intimidate independent media in India and suppress the truth. All this to deprive citizens of their right to be informed about what is happening around them. While there have been attacks on press freedom before, what is different this time is that a section of media has literally become an extension of the government's propaganda machinery. But there are others, journalists and media platforms who at great personal risk are still questioning the government, reporting the facts and raising the concerns of the marginalized sections. And for this, they are often portrayed as enemies of the state. तो इस घुटन भरे अंधेरे खौफनाक माहौल में कैसे कोई पत्रकार अपना काम करेगा? क्या भारत में पत्रकारिता की मौत नजदीक है? मैं कहती हूँ यही तो वक्त है जब हम पत्रकारिता की वो किताब, वो पवित्र किताब फिर से उठाएं जिसके हर पन्ने पर यह जड़ा हुआ है कि हम और हमारा काम कितना जरूरी है। यह हमारे पेशे का महत्व और जरूरत ही तो है कि सत्ता अपनी पूरी ताकत और अहंकार के साथ हमारी आवाज कुचल देना चाहती है। यही वो जरूरत है जो मेरे जैसे पत्रकारों को कंप्लीट ब्लैकआउट के बावजूद सरकार की मर्जी के खिलाफ हर खौफ और खतरे की परवाह किए बिना कश्मीर ले जाती है और मैं भारत के संविधान और नागरिक अधिकारों की लाइव हत्या अपने कैमरे में कैद कर पाती हूँ। यही वो जिम्मेदारी है जो भारतीय लोकतंत्र के हाशिए पर रह रहे दलित, आदिवासियों, मजदूरों, मुसलमानों की कुचली हुई आवाजों तक मेरा माइक और कैमरा पहुंचता है और उन कहानियों के जरिए लोकतंत्र के सूरज की कुछ किरणें उनकी अंधेरी गलियों और अंधेरे जीवन में शायद पहुंच पाती हैं। लोकतंत्र में यही विश्वास वो एक अदना से नागरिक को वो ताकत दे देता है कि शाहीन बाग की मुट्ठी भर महिलाओं ने सत्ता के अहंकार को चुनौती दी और भारतीय समाज की अंतरात्मा को जगाया। सीमित संसाधन और सीमित पहुंच द वायर जैसे छोटे मीडिया संस्थानों को की अपनी हदें जरूर हैं, लेकिन हम अपनी हदों की परवाह नहीं करते, अपनी जिम्मेदारी और जरूरत को पहचानते हैं। हमारी जवाबदेही किसी नेता या सेठ के प्रति नहीं, उन करोड़ों पाठकों और दर्शकों के लिए है जो स्वतंत्र पत्रकारिता का समर्थन करते हैं। और इसका एक खास उदाहरण मैं आपको देना चाहती हूँ कि किस तरह से हमारे दर्शक हमारा समर्थन करते हैं कि YouTube के कमेंट सेक्शन में नीचे कई बार मैंने दर्शकों को देखा, उन्होंने कहा कि 200 रुपया महीना हम आपको देते हैं, असम के हमारे फलां इलाके से आपने खबर अभी तक कवर क्यों नहीं की है, या छत्तीसगढ़ के आदिवासी बिल्कुल इलाके की एक महिला, एक लड़की लिखती है कि मैं अपने पॉकेट मनी से 100 रुपए आपको हर महीने पे करती हूँ, मेरी खबर अभी तक क्यों नहीं चली है। इसलिए हमारी जिम्मेदारी सिर्फ हमारे पाठकों और दर्शकों के प्रति है। इसलिए हम जानते हैं कि हमारे लोकतंत्र के जिंदा रहने के लिए जरूरी है मीडिया का जिंदा रहना, उसके जमीर का जिंदा रहना। जरूरी है सत्ता की आंख में आंख डालकर सवाल पूछना। जरूरी है ताकत के नशे में मदमस्त निरंकुश होते शासकों को उनका राजधर्म याद दिलाना। जरूरी है नफरत और बदले की भावना के गहरे कुएं में धकेल दी गई एक पूरी पीढ़ी को आवाज लगाना और याद दिलाना कि ये लोकतंत्र हमने कितनी मेहनत, कितनी मशक्कत से अर्जित किया है। इस लोकतंत्र की इमारत को खड़ा करने में हमारा खून पसीना लगा है। देश का सबसे गरीब नागरिक एक एक ईंट बनकर इस इमारत में लगा हुआ है। ये देश राजनीतिक पार्टियों का नहीं, हमारा और आपका है। सरकारें आती जाती रहेंगी, आती जाती रहेंगी, आती जाती रहती हैं। ये देश हमेशा था, हमेशा रहेगा। मुझे खुशी इस बात की है कि मुझे इस सम्मान के लिए चुना गया, लेकिन मुझसे कहीं ज्यादा मेहनत और खतरा उठाते हैं कस्बों, गांव देहात में छोटे कहे जाने वाले वो पत्रकार जिनका काम मुझसे कहीं ज्यादा बड़ा है। ट्विटर, फेसबुक पर उनके लाखों फॉलोअर्स तो नहीं है, लेकिन वो बड़े खतरे उठाकर खबर का एक छोटा सा टुकड़ा आप तक लेकर आते हैं। इन्हीं पत्रकारों की बदौलत भारत में पत्रकारिता जिंदा है। ये अवार्ड पाकर मेरी खुशी इसलिए भी दोगुनी हो गई है कि ये सम्मान सिर्फ मेरा नहीं बल्कि हिंदी पत्रकारिता का भी है। गर्त में जाती पत्रकारिता यूं तो भाषाओं की सीमा को नहीं पहचानती, लेकिन इस दौर की पत्रकारिता का जब इतिहास लिखा जाएगा तो हिंदी के टीवी पत्रकारों के लिए अलंकार ढूंढने मुश्किल होंगे। साथ ही मैं इस अवसर का इस्तेमाल करना चाहती हूँ ये अपील करने के लिए कि टीवी के पत्रकार अपने पाठकों और दर्शकों के प्रति अपने कर्तव्य के बारे में एक बार फिर से जरूर सोचें। So is independent journalism dead in India? This may be largely true for media controlled by big money and the government. But the fact is that there are many journalists who are ready to stake everything to fulfill their duties, and there are millions of people who have been coming forward to support independently run media houses like The Wire. This is proof that the public wants free media and is willing to put its faith and money into it. So precisely this model of a public supported media organization is the future of journalism in the largest democracy of the world. Once again, thank you very much for this honor. I want to dedicate this award to the people of Kashmir and the women of Shaheen Bagh who have been the single largest influence on my journalism this year. I also want to thank the Wire's editors for providing me the platform and having faith in my work, and I want to thank all my colleagues in our small but stellar video department. And last but not the least, my family that has been a pillar of strength for me, my parents, my husband and my children. It wouldn't have been possible without their support.
Chameli Devi Jain Award for an Outstanding Woman Journalist 2019. Rohini Mohan. Rohini Mohan is being jointly presented the Chameli Devi Jain Award for an Outstanding Woman Journalist 2019 for exceptional reportage from Assam on the events around the controversy over the citizenship issue. Her work is characterized by two essential qualities of a good reporter: integrity and perseverance. She has demonstrated a capacity for combining a reporter's curiosity and inquisitiveness with an admirable sensibility and respect for decency, for blending the local and the specific with a larger perspective, for engaging with the affected without losing sight of the need for detachment and impartiality. Rohini is recognized for her consistent record of first-rate reporting from Assam and its many fault lines, cascading into the entire northeast region. Her reports and larger work have filled a major gap in the nation's understanding of a distant part of India, bringing to attention complexities and complications behind the recurring conflicts and contestations. To the extent her work is intelligently informed by professional and intellectual honesty, she provides the first drafts of history. Beyond Assam, Rohini has done extensive reporting from Sri Lanka as well as from other trouble spots in India. In doing so, she has displayed courage, clear-headedness and a commitment to tell it as it is, a refusal to take at face value the official line, and a healthy willingness to question orthodoxy, all essential qualities of robustly independent journalism which are fast disappearing from the Indian media. Rohini is also recognized as a leading specimen of the new generation of women journalists, educated, confident, unafraid and competent to make their contribution to the abiding values and obligations of good journalism. Her talent has already been widely recognized and her non-fiction work vastly appreciated. The Media Foundation is honoured to salute Rohini Mohan with the Chameli Devi Jain Award for 2019.
Thank you so much for the Chameli Devi Jain Award. I spent most of the last 2 years reporting on the citizenship issue, how it functions and how it impacts people in Assam, and also how it impacts the rest of the country. Thank you so much for acknowledging this work. It's extremely encouraging. As an independent journalist, I wrote on the issue for 8 publications over 1 year. I must thank all the editors and publications who demanded newer angles and stronger stories, especially Vice News. They carried my investigation into foreigners' tribunals in Assam. The verdicts that I got through RTIs showed how dangerously biased and arbitrary the functioning of the tribunals are. It was an attempt to merge data journalism with ground-reported narrative, and I'm honoured that it is recognised today. I am deeply honoured, but honestly, I just don't think that I've done enough. Every time a story is praised as brave or important or award-worthy, I know how many of us journalists look at who it has helped on the ground. Has it helped anyone at all concretely? Has it undone a law? There were massive protests across the country against the National Register of Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Act that openly discriminates against Muslims. But today, there are detentions, intimidation, and charges of rioting against the peaceful organizers of these very protests. Our reporting on these issues does expose how flimsy these accusations are and throws more proof at the world, but it's also sometimes the source of a paralyzing cynicism. Sometimes it seems that journalism is done for its own sake. When you see unbearable injustices like the disenfranchisement of people or obvious undeserved hardship like migrant workers faced after an overnight lockdown, reporting gives a sense of purpose and writing or expression gives a sense of release. Sometimes I wonder if that's all it's about. Even when a story exposes injustice, even when it is in public interest, one story rarely changes anything, and one journalist changes nothing. The only times when journalism has been able to really shake the foundations of power are when we reported as a collective, even unconsciously. When more than a dozen usual suspects zero in on injustice and keep the pressure up from all sides with daily reports, in-depth reports, follow-ups, video, audio, fact checks, data journalism. Like many are doing now to cover the brutal rape in Hathras and the prevalence of upper caste violence against Dalits. We did it for the citizenship issue as reporters from across states and languages explored how it works, what it will do, who it will affect most. In Assam first, and then after the Delhi riots, I saw young reporters working as a collective. I was part of them sometimes, sharing costs and contacts, protecting each other, talking through their confusions. Journalists who cover the environment, for instance, do it all the time. Working like this makes it easier to ignore the abuses that come our way, like being called Latin's journalist or JNU wale, which anyway describes so few of us. There are external forces which are already making it harder for us reporters to simply do our jobs. Media organizations don't want to spend money on field reporting. Hundreds of my fellow journalists have lost their jobs this year in the middle of a pandemic. Many others are facing criminal charges for what they've said or written. And journalists working in Jammu and Kashmir find their hands tied by the state in ways that we can't even imagine. As a working field reporter, I say to people with money, intellectual curiosity, and ethics, please invest in investigative projects and independent journalists. For my investigation on the foreigners' tribunals, Type Investigation provided editorial and financial support. Without it, I couldn't have spent the time I needed on my story. They gave me not just funds, but also fact checkers and an editor that I could call at the end of a reporting day. They would have given me legal support if it came to that. Lack of financial and legal support knocks the wind out of public interest journalism and forces the burden of courage and bravery on committed and already poorly funded journalists. We need more journalists to throw ourselves at public interest stories with solidarity and healthy competition. We need to drown out the anchors and talking heads who never leave their studios. We need more reporting from the ground, from a variety of voices, and not just English language upper caste journalists like me. And for that, we need holistic investment in Indian journalism and Indian journalists. For powerful projects, for reporters writing in Hindi, Tamil, Marathi, and other languages. And basic, decent support for those facing litigation. Like many of my peers, I spend more time thinking about the stories that we haven't done than feeling good about the ones that we have. What this award actually does is remind me that I was part of a rare harmony of reporting on the citizenship issue. It was sensitive, humane, and persistent. It also reminds me that we need so much more of that. Thank you once again for the recognition.
Chameli Devi Jain Award for an Outstanding Woman Journalist 2019, Honorable Mention, Rukmini S. The Chameli Devi Jain Award aims to promote excellence in journalism through recognizing the work of outstanding women journalists. The members of the jury for the Chameli Devi Jain Award 2019 decided to acknowledge Rukmini S for an honorable mention for her sharp and analytical journalistic work. Rukmini skillfully handles data to analyze complex issues and provide insightful reports on those issues. Her work is not only marked with meticulous research, but is well contextualized. Her ability to interpret dry data into interesting stories on contemporary issues is exemplary. Her data-driven journalism deals with topics and issues that do not attract the attention of mainstream media. Rukmini's work has focused on issues of critical importance. These issues range from displaying the ways in which state policies impact the marginalized and poorer sections of society, what are the factors that motivate voters, the masculinization of Indian workforce, to statistics on sexual violence. Her data-driven approach for election coverage has added a new, more credible way through which the media covers elections. Through the use of data during the general elections of 2019, Rukmini has sought to illustrate how and why voters make the choices that they do. This has helped to create a whole new awareness about the ground realities of our electoral process. It has also expanded the way elections are reported in the Indian media, going beyond opinion polls and the impressionistic reportage of touring journalists. Rukmini is recognized and honored for the intellectual rigor she brings to unearthing the connections between different sets of data and illustrating emerging trends and the correlations between them. Her stories, using the tools of statistical interpretations, are an example of modern journalism at its best.
On January 12, 2018, an extraordinary event took place in New Delhi. 4 sitting judges of the Supreme Court decided to hold a press conference in which they expressed their unhappiness at the manner in which the apex court was discharging its institutional duties. Among these 4 brave judges was Justice Madan Lokur, and we are honored to have him this evening with us to deliver the 2020 V.G. Verghese Memorial Lecture. Justice Lokur was touched on the shoulder in February 1999 and was inducted in the country's judicial elite. He began his innings on the bench as a judge of the Delhi High Court. He quickly earned a reputation as a steady and fair judge and was soon elevated first as Chief Justice of Guwahati High Court and later as Chief Justice of the High Court of Andhra Pradesh. In June 2012, he was called upon to join the Supreme Court as a judge. He retired on December 30, 2018. He is presently a judge of the Supreme Court of Fiji. As a judge of Supreme Court, Justice Madan Lokur has been the very embodiment of the finest qualities and venerable traditions of higher judiciary, displaying a quiet dignity, intellectual sobriety, judicial rectitude, unwavering commitment to the court's institutional dharma, and above all, a sense of obligation to strive continuously for creating and sustaining a fair and equitable society. Since his retirement from Supreme Court, Justice Lokur has lent his measured voice to our continued collective quest for a humane social order and a fair constitutional arrangement. It is therefore only fitting that this evening he should be meditating on the topic of preserving and protecting our fundamental rights, freedom of speech, expression, and the right to protest. A most contemporary theme, I should add. And as we have just heard from winners of the Chameli Devi Awards, it was never as difficult as it is now for citizens to express dissent, for activists and political cadres to exercise our right to protest, and for journalists to carry out the simple, basic task of a reporter, that is, to bring to light what is happening in our society and polity. Today, we are still trying to come to grips with what has happened in Hathras in Uttar Pradesh. Medieval animosities and prejudices continue to get privileged over notions of human dignity, and much to our dismay, because of electoral political calculations, we continue to find arguments and alibis to condone the brutal violation of basic constitutional promises and guarantees. What has happened in Hathras is just one ugly reminder, a very ugly reminder, indeed, of the mauling of republican virtues and democratic rights and liberties. Worse, we have been reminded once again of the state's capacity and its willingness to brazen it out, to come down heavily on anyone questioning its priorities and prejudices, and to demonstrate unapologetically its authoritarian proclivities. In all fairness, it must be noted that authoritarian itch never goes away. Sometimes it gets subdued, sometimes it goes into hibernation, awaiting the right moment to raise its ugly head once again. It is the task of conscientious public intellectual to keep reminding us of who we are, of what we have long ago committed ourselves to be, and more importantly, what we do not want to become. It is the task of public intellectuals like Justice Lokur to reiterate the details of constitutional compact and our social contract to build a fair society, an equitable social order, and a joyfully creative and questioning political culture. We must remind ourselves of our collective duty to remain unafraid of the mandatory policeman, unintimidated by the overbearing magistrate, and uncompromising in our democratic beliefs and values. It is in this spirit, it is my pleasure now to call upon Justice Madan Lokur to deliver this year's BG Memorial Lecture. Justice Lokur.
Thank you, Harish, and good evening, distinguished guests. It is an honor to have been asked to deliver this year's Verghese Memorial Lecture. BG Verghese, or George to his friends and St. George to his admirers, was one of the most respected names in post-independent Indian journalism. He was also a classic specimen of the classic newspaperman anywhere in the world familiar with free press. A man of impeccable professional integrity, committed to society's well-being, and an editor unafraid of the powerful in and out of government. And it is most befitting that the Media Foundation keeps alive the values Verghese Saab cherished by way of an annual lecture series in his name. This evening, I wish to address a gradual erosion of one of our most precious fundamental rights, the inalienable right to freedom of speech and expression, an erosion that is leading to the gradual destruction of our human right to dissent and protest. This lethal cocktail is adversely impacting the liberty of all those who dare to speak up. Article 21 of our Constitution, the right to life and personal liberty, is under a silent threat, and we all know the consequence of losing our liberty. Simply put, we will cease to be a democratic republic. Of course, our fundamental rights cannot be absolute, and so our Constitution has placed a few reasonable restrictions on the right to free speech. Yet, it is important to note that these restrictions can be imposed only by law, enacted by Parliament, and the restrictions have to be reasonable. Our freedom of speech is being eroded and mauled through twisting and turning the law, if not abusing it altogether. The law needs to be objectively interpreted, but subjective satisfaction has taken over and the consequences are unpalatable. Dissent or expression of a different point of view has become an issue to the extent that bona fide speech sometimes becomes a security threat. Some cynics glibly suggest that if the speaker is not guilty, he or she will be acquitted of the charges framed. But the fact of the matter is that detention as an under trial is a gut-wrenching experience for anyone, and particularly for a person whose cries of innocence fall on deaf ears. Such a person looks to the judiciary for protecting his or her freedom of speech and liberty, but gets overwhelmed by the painfully slow justice delivery system. I propose to discuss our fundamental right of free speech and expression and the right to disagree in different compartments, and I hope the picture will reveal why we might need to conduct an inquest in due course of time. First, free speech and sedition. Ours is a country governed by the rule of law. So let us first appreciate what the law has to say on some aspects of freedom of speech. In my opinion, one of the worst forms of curtailment of the freedom of speech is charging a person with sedition. Way back in 1962, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court in Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar considered the constitutionality of sedition in section 124 capital A of the Indian Penal Code as a penal offence. While doing so, it was held that the freedom of speech and expression, and I quote, has to be guarded against becoming a license for vilification and condemnation of the government established by law in words which incite violence or have the tendency to create public disorder. A citizen has a right to say or write whatever he likes about the government or its measures by way of criticism or comment, so long as he does not incite people to violence against the government established by law or with the intention of creating public disorder. The Supreme Court, therefore, drew a correlation between sedition and violence, sedition and inciting violence, and sedition and tendency to incite violence. Not just simple violence, but violence of such a degree as to bring it within the purview of public disorder. So when you have rival gangs confronting each other and one of them shouts, "Maro," a law and order situation of rioting and attempt to murder arises, not of sedition. The police, lawyers, and judges have dealt with all such cases purely as a law and order problem. However, depending on the occasion and context, when a speaker raises a slogan at a public gathering of supporters by shouting "Goli Maro," a charge could possibly be laid of tending to incite violence or incitement to violence and raising a public order issue rather than merely a law and order issue. The distinction is quite clear and should be clear to any policeman and magistrate. On the other hand, when there is a call to protest for a cause without any incitement to violence, it would not be sedition under any circumstances. For example, when a call was made for large numbers to assemble on the lawns of India Gate to protest against the rape and murder of Nirbhaya, the organizers of the protest were not committing sedition. Similarly, when India Against Corruption peacefully protested on the Ramleela grounds, the organizers could not be held liable for sedition. This is extremely important for distinguishing between free speech and sedition, but unfortunately, the distinction is being lost sight of by the establishment. Frequent use of the law against sedition began sometime in 2012 during the India Against Corruption movement. Among the first few persons to be arrested for sedition was a political cartoonist who depicted the national emblem of 3 lions and the parliament building in a manner unacceptable to the establishment. Perhaps the idea was to keep that cartoonist in custody by hook or by crook, and so the charge of sedition was added. The law was obviously twisted to sustain this charge since the cartoon did not incite or have a tendency to incite violence. But the objective was achieved, and the cartoonist was sent to jail for a while. Interestingly, in due course, the charge of sedition was withdrawn against him. But I will not be surprised if the incident had a chilling effect on some political cartoonists. Section 505 of the IPC was made use of against 2 young girls for a Facebook post in 2012. One of them questioned the need for declaring a holiday on the death of a political leader, and the other liked that post. At best, this was only an expression of an opinion that one may agree or disagree with. Unfortunately, both the young girls were arrested for creating or promoting enmity, hatred, or ill will between classes. So, the expression of a possibly unpalatable opinion became a criminal offense against the establishment. The Facebook post caused anguish among supporters of the political leader, and they vandalized the hospital of the girl's uncle. An innocent tweet led to 3 consequences: silencing the young girls and perhaps many others who held the same or a similar opinion, sending a chilling message to others to be careful about voicing opinions, and finally, imprisonment and damage to personal property. In one word, tweet at your own risk, a lesson that the Supreme Court sought to teach Prashant Bhushan quite recently. Second, free speech and cooked up cases. In recent years, new methods of silencing speech have been introduced. Attribute something to a speaker that he or she never said. I find this simply amazing. Try and visualize a police complaint filed against you for something you never said, and you are kept in jail for several months and eventually set free after litigating for your rights. Imagine the trauma that you and your family would have to go through, and on the other hand, the police gets away without even a censure. Well, this has actually happened. A doctor delivered an address to students of the Aligarh Muslim University criticizing the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens. More than a month later, he was arrested for making an inflammatory and provocative speech. About 10 days later, he was granted bail but was not released for reasons that are not clear. However, immediately thereafter, he was kept in preventive detention under the National Security Act by an order issued on 13th February 2020. This is a draconian law and entails detention without trial and is based on the subjective satisfaction of the detaining authority who makes a prognosis of the future activity of the détenu. In other words, the detaining authority says that he or she is satisfied on the basis of past conduct that the détenu is likely in future to act in a manner prejudicial to the security of the state or to the maintenance of public order. By a judgment and order passed on 1st September 2020, the Allahabad High Court quashed the detention order. Almost every procedure known to law was violated. Additionally, on a limited judicial review of the grounds of detention, the Allahabad High Court concluded that the détenu was alleged to have said things which he did not. For example, while he spoke of national integrity, he was accused of promoting hatred. While he deprecated violence, he was accused of promoting violence. This is a classic instance of cooking up a case against a person with the intention of putting him behind bars for several months. Another recent case on the same subject of attribution is that of a student activist, accused, among other things, of attempt to murder and making an inflammatory speech and inciting violence. The offending speech was made by her on 25th February 2020, and she was arrested 3 months later on 25th May 2020. The Delhi High Court granted her bail after another 3 months by a judgment and order dated 1st September 2020. And while granting bail, it was noted that the prosecution had failed to produce any material that she, in her speech, instigated women of a particular community or gave a hate speech. Admittedly, the High Court said, agitation was going on since long. Print and electronic media was present throughout, in addition to cameras of police department, but there is no such evidence which establishes that the alleged offence has taken place on the act done by the petitioner, except some statements recorded under section 164 of the CRPC. These cases, and there are others, lead to a frightening inference that if a citizen exercises the freedom of speech and says something that is not even distasteful, yet he or she can be arrested on the basis of a fairy tale and will have to go through a long drawn process for being set free. If that person does not say anything at all, but is otherwise a thorn in the flesh of the establishment, even then that person can still be arrested and detained on some cooked up or trumped up charges. Please try and again imagine the impact of this, and if you are old enough, please compare it to the period between 1975 and 1977, when persons were jailed for allegedly threatening the internal security of the country without any evidence in this regard. We are gradually witnessing a somewhat similar situation. Third, free speech and fake news. How does one define fake news, and how does one distinguish it from misinformation or disinformation? How does one look at propaganda disseminated by the establishment? Is it fake news or misinformation or disinformation? Would it invite a charge of sedition against the purveyor of that propaganda? That question needs to be asked. A few tweets believed to be fake news relating to Kashmir have attracted a charge of sedition against a university student, and investigations have been going on against her for the last 1 year. The student tweeted to the effect that the army was entering houses at night, picking up boys, ransacking houses, and deliberately spilling rations on the floor. She also alleged that 4 men were called into an army camp and interrogated. Read tortured. The allegations were denied as baseless by the army, and it appears that it had closed the matter and no complaint was filed against her for the tweets. However, some public-spirited person lodged a police complaint alleging that this was a case of fake news that excited disaffection towards the government established by law and is therefore sedition. On this basis, the issue has been kept alive by the police for more than a year with no effective result as yet. The army has closed the matter, but the police is still at it. 3 questions arise from this episode. Can the tweets be categorized as seditious in light of the judgment of the Supreme Court? If the army, against whose credibility the tweets were directed, has dismissed the allegations and not lodged any complaint and effectively closed the matter, should a complaint by a third party at all be entertained by the police? Finally, does it take more than a year to analyze a few tweets to determine if they are seditious or not? Or are police investigations being used merely to silence her? Similarly, a person in Punjab was charged with sedition for spreading fake news that ventilators were not available for COVID-19 patients in a particular district. Assuming this was not true, it could easily have been denied by the district administration. But foisting a charge of sedition on him? Contrast this case with another case of fake news, where no action has been taken against an elected cabinet minister who made a bizarre claim that a particular brand of papad provides immunity from the coronavirus. So far, no one has dared to officially contradict the cabinet minister, except the coronavirus, which attacked the cabinet minister and made him COVID positive, leading to his hospitalization. The pandemic has generated a tremendous amount of fake news in our country and worldwide. There is no doubt that fake news must be countered effectively and quickly, but surely a charge of sedition is not the answer. Apart from a vague definition of fake news and its subjective interpretation, these cases show that the establishment prefers to act against the weak and defenseless with what was recently described as an iron hand rather than against the privileged who can get away by saying anything. The fundamental right of freedom of speech cannot be applied arbitrarily. Fourth, free speech and the press. In the last few years, the establishment has displayed a new determination and great ingenuity in securing conformity and obedience from the press. The cumulative effect is chilling. We all recall Mr. L.K. Advani's observation that during the emergency, journalists were merely asked to bend, but they chose to crawl. Today, there is no emergency, and nobody has asked the media to bend. Yet, the perception, may be wrong, is that they are crawling. There are two possible reasons. The first is a June 2020 report by the Rights and Risks Analysis Group, which recorded that, and I quote, a total of at least 55 journalists faced arrest, registration of FIRs, summons or show cause notices, physical assaults, alleged destruction of properties and threats for reportage on COVID-19, or exercising freedom of opinion and expression during the national lockdown from 25th March to 31st May 2020, unquote. These measures were taken in 20 states and union territories and included charges of sedition, promoting enmity among different groups, causing breach of peace, and so on. The second possible reason is that an unseen iron hand has been used to silence dissent and criticism. In May, an egregious case concerning the freedom of speech related to the arrest of the editor of a news portal. His alleged crime of sedition was spreading fake news by speculating that the chief minister of the state is likely to be replaced for his inept handling of the pandemic and thereby exciting disaffection against the government. In this particular case, while rejecting the application for bail, the magistrate is reported to have said that the journalist was trying to destabilize the government, and what he said was a contempt against the government. Fortunately, the higher court granted him bail, but after he had spent about 15 days in custody. In June, a senior and respected journalist had a sedition charge leveled against him for a YouTube show and had to petition the Supreme Court for staying his arrest. The allegations may have been reckless or bizarre as they have been described, but the question is whether they can be classified as seditious given the law laid down by the Supreme Court over 50 years ago. The chilling message to the press is to crawl or else. Just a few days ago, the horrible gang rape and murder of a young girl in Hathras resulted in another and rather ingenious method of restricting the freedom of the press. With a view to prohibit the media from reporting anything about the events, the establishment completely cordoned off the entire area with about a few hundred policemen and issued a prohibitory order under section 144 of the CRPC so that nobody could enter the area. Some intrepid journalists attempted individually to meet the family of the victim without violating the prohibitory order, but was stopped from doing so on the basis of some undisclosed order said to have been passed by some higher-ups. This is nothing but an egregious violation of the freedom of the press through a bizarre abuse of the law. Everyone is hearing and seeing what is going on, but is anybody listening? The other question to be asked in this context is, can any serious journalist function fearlessly if an opinion expressed, however absurd or bizarre, leads to arrest and a charge of sedition, followed by a long-drawn battle in the courts? Can such serious charges be leveled so casually? And remember, a free press is the fourth pillar of democracy. Fifth, weaponizing the sedition law. The National Crime Records Bureau started keeping a record of sedition cases in 2014 and every year has seen a spike in sedition cases. The number reached a high of 70 cases in 2018. Figures for 2019, recently released by the National Crime Records Bureau, revealed that 93 cases were registered. That is about a 30% increase. Almost every state seems to have weaponized sedition as a means of silencing critics, and the numbers are increasing. Any statement is good enough for a sedition case. And this is not just in a few states, it is in almost every state and union territory. On 31st October 1984, the day Mrs. Indira Gandhi was assassinated, two public servants shouted, "Khalistan Zindabad." The atmosphere in the country was charged, and yet the Supreme Court held that this did not amount to sedition. The Supreme Court held, and I quote, "It does not appear to us that the police should have attached much significance to the casual slogans raised by two appellants a couple of times and read too much into them. The casual raising of the slogans once or twice by two individuals alone cannot be said to be aimed at exciting or attempt to excite hatred or disaffection towards the government as established by law in India." How things have changed since then. In an absolutely peaceful atmosphere, a teenager in Bengaluru raised a particular slogan 3 times, and this resulted in her arrest on charges of sedition. Could this ever amount to destabilizing the government? But this teenager spent 4 months in jail before she was granted bail. Again, in Karnataka, as many as 85 school children were interrogated by the police concerning a play in which a child recites what the authorities found to be an objectionable dialogue. The mother of the child and the teacher who oversaw the play were charged with sedition and arrested. Please try and imagine the trauma that the school children would have gone through with policemen and police women questioning kids over 5 days in school. And while we are discussing destabilizing the government, does horse trading of MLAs, let me be clear, this is not my expression but one used by the Supreme Court. Does horse trading of a few MLAs with the view to topple a duly elected government amount to sedition? Perhaps. In July, the Special Operations Group in Rajasthan filed FIRs against 6 MLAs for sedition, but because they had indulged in horse trading with a view to topple the government. However, just before the High Court was to take up the challenge to the sedition charge, the allegations were withdrawn. A pity, because it would have been a fun case. 6th, free speech and the internet. District or statewide internet shutdowns are becoming a tool to stifle freedom of expression through prior restraint. Shutdowns are effected through blanket orders under the guise of preventing breach of peace. In most cases, they are deployed when the authorities apprehend that people may exercise their fundamental right to freedom of expression to organize a peaceful protest that is critical of the state. An internet shutdown is a highly disproportionate response since it affects everyone who uses the internet for professional reasons, for communicating with family or friends, for access to education, medical facilities, and so on. In December 2019, there was an internet shutdown across all districts of Assam, and mobile internet was suspended for almost a week. While striking down the shutdown, the Guwahati High Court noted, mobile internet services now play a major role in the daily walks of life. So much so, shutdown of the mobile internet service virtually amounts to bringing life to a grinding halt. The High Court then directed the state to restore mobile internet services with effect from the evening of the same date. In Allahabad, the High Court took suo motu cognizance of the internet shutdown imposed in the city and while issuing notice observed that stoppage of internet services has paralyzed the entire judicial system. In Anuradha Bhasin's case, the Supreme Court in January 2020, while deciding the legitimacy of internet shutdowns as well as physical lockdowns in Jammu and Kashmir, stopped short of declaring access to internet as a fundamental right, but declared that the right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) and the right to carry on any trade or business under Article 19(1)(g) using the medium of internet is constitutionally protected. In September this year, the Kerala High Court recognized that access to the internet is essential for not only exercise of freedom of speech, but also the right to education. It was noted that the United Nations Human Rights Council had declared that right to access the internet is a fundamental freedom. We have the unenviable record of stifling freedom of speech and expression through maximum number of internet shutdowns and for prolonged periods in any vibrant democracy. In conclusion, I would say that there is no doubt that the fundamental right to free speech is extremely important for any civilized democracy to survive. Similarly, the right to protest peaceably and without arms is also an equally important fundamental right guaranteed to all of us under the Constitution. While it is important for each one of us to exercise our fundamental rights within reasonable limits laid down by law, there is a greater obligation on the establishment to ensure that the laws are not twisted, misused, or abused in such a manner that citizens are deprived of fundamental rights that impact on the liberty of an individual. We have seen several instances of deprivation of liberty with persons having to spend days and sometimes months in jail for remarks that would perhaps not attract any attention, except for the fact that the establishment used draconian laws to silence those dissenting voices and thereby give them traction. It is time for the establishment to realize that the people of this country mean well. And as in any democracy, there are bound to be different points of view. These must be respected. Otherwise, the fabric of our society might disintegrate, and fraternity, one of the key words in the preamble to our Constitution, might just become another dead idea. Thank you and God bless.
That was most illuminating, Justice Lokur. Thank you. We are in your debt for this evening's powerful dissection of the law and its interpretation and its implementation. I am confident that your reflections will deepen our understanding and will go a long way in helping the citizens assert their legitimate rights and reassert their right to protest and right to have their voice heard. We appreciate you taking so much time out for us. In fact, indulging us twice, once last March and now this evening. On behalf of Media Foundation, I express our profound thanks. I also take this opportunity to put on record our immense gratitude to Shri Ashok Bajpai and the Raja Foundation for so generously supporting activities of the Media Foundation in defense of creative freedom. We are also thankful to India International Center, especially its program division, for hosting us this evening and for continuing partnership with the Media Foundation. And I'm grateful to all my colleagues, Ms. Manika Chopra and others for joining, making the collective effort for the success of this evening's program. Thank you very much. Good evening.